Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Anna Kunz, and I'm Impact and Outreach Manager for the Earth Investigations Grant Program at Journalismfund Europe. And as you may know, Journalismfund Europe does its best to support investigative journalism on the affairs related to Europe, and it's great to see you all here with us. And whether you dig into pollution or climate policy, habitats or biodiversity loss, perhaps, or water and soil contamination, greenwashing, mining. At Journalismfund, we believe in the importance of this work to keep European citizens better informed and to hold institutions and companies accountable for environmental damage or negligence. Through the Earth Investigations Program, Journalismfund provides support for cross-border collaborations of journalists working on in-depth environmental stories. This initiative is designed to give you the time, resources, and last but not least, editorial independence from donors that you need to follow the evidence wherever it leads. And in addition to 2 grant programs for environmental investigation and for professional development of environmental journalism, we have these webinars as a space to discuss relevant topics and skills for environmental journalists. Today's session, as well as the next 2 sessions in this series, for which you can already register, is prepared and moderated by Juliana Rufus, investigative filmmaker, journalism trainer, and a longtime mentor for the Earth Investigations Program. Thank you very much for taking this responsibility, Juliana. I now hand over to you to introduce the purpose of the session, our dear speakers, and to guide us through the next hour and a half. Over to you, Juliana. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna, for the introduction. And as always, it really is a pleasure to work with Journalismfund Europe. And as Anna said, I'm an investigative filmmaker. I have worked for Al Jazeera for many years on the People in Power strand. I've been an executive producer at BBCI Investigations, and I also work as a journalism trainer and consultant quite a bit now. And one of the things that, Anna, you mentioned that I do is I work as a mentor for Journalismfund Europe on environmental and sometimes also cross-border investigations. And I think I often work maybe with younger teams. And one of the issues that has come up, especially for freelancers who can't draw on their own newsrooms, is what legal principles and investigations do I need to know? And what do editors, if I'm pitching, we have a second webinar coming up specifically on pitching, but this one is about legal aspects in pitching. So what do investigative editors expect freelancers to know in terms of their legal knowledge when they pitch investigations? And to explore this further, we really have 3 amazing investigative editors who are joining us. And I think are probably known to quite a few of you from 3 different places. I will start with Whoopi Leijendijk, who is joining us from Holland. And Whoopi is a senior editor and investigative journalist for NRC newspaper, one of Holland's leading daily newspapers. And between 2019 and February this year, she was the head of the investigative department at NRC. And as that, she oversaw a group of 14 editors. And each of these editors came with their own investigative background and expertise. And together, they conducted investigations in which they questioned power, exposed systemic failures, and uncovered abuses and wrongdoing. Since February this year, Whoopi has gone back to working as an investigative reporter, but she also still does some editing and overseeing of investigations and also mentors and takes care of younger colleagues. And crucially, as also Andrew and Giulio, who I'm about to introduce, she works with freelancers and she takes pitches. And from the US, early in the morning, we've got Andrew Lehren joining us. Andrew is a multi-award-winning investigative journalist, data reporter, FOIA expert, and his stories have led to arrests and changes in laws and legislation. He's the director of investigative reporting at CUNY Newman School of Journalism, and also a bit more recent, the investigative editor of Mongabay, which, if you're here looking at environmental investigations, many of you may know it's an independent, non-profit environmental science and conservation news platform reporting on forests, wildlife, oceans, and sustainability. And Mongabay is really special because it draws on a global network of over 500 journalists in roughly 50 countries and publishes in multiple languages. And Andy, too, receives investigative pitches from reporters around the world. And then last but not least, Giulio Rubino, who I'm sure many of you know as well. Giulio is the co-founder and co-editor-in-chief at Irpi Media, an Italian investigative online magazine. And Giulio also teaches investigative journalism at the Journalism School of Fondazione Lelio Basso. So he tries to work where possible still as an investigative journalist, but is now mostly an editor for Irpi Media on national and international stories, and works with the Irpi in-house team of reporters and receives pitches from freelancers. And Irpi Media, I know, has pitched and obtained funding from Journalismfund Europe. And the way we've decided to organize this webinar is that in this first part, we get Giulio, Andrew, and Wubi to talk about some of the general principles of investigative journalism and the law, what you all need to know. And then once we've gone through that, we will hear specific case studies that each of them have prepared and that we've discussed, so that we can actually look at what all of that means in practice. So, the one thing that we haven't said is questions. There will be the last part of this webinar will be your questions, and you're welcome to post any questions that come up during the webinar. If they're directed at Andrew, Giulio, or Wubi, please let us know. I'll moderate the questions, maybe with Anna's help later on. So the last part is about any questions that you may have. So starting off, and we've had, of course, the preparation for this where we've already nailed and identified some of the basics, but what are the legal basic concepts that you would expect freelancers who are pitching to you to know? We've talked about the words that everybody knows: defamation, libel, public interest. Who of the three of you wants to make a start? Okay, Giulio, do you want to start with, you've mentioned defamation and libel. So you're getting a pitch from a freelancer. What are you looking out for in that context?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and thanks for being here to all the participants. Of course, this is our aspects that normally come out during the course of the story. Only a small part of it is clear from the beginning, and very often in pitches, as an editor, you don't understand how much of the legal aspects of the story the reporter has already thought through, but you always look for clues. And as an editor, I can say that if I understand that the reporter has a few key principles clear, I'm much more relaxed in taking in the story. I know that the whole process will be smoother, and that the reporter is prepared for the fact-checking and legal analysis part that is what we do in the last part of the investigation, not immediately just before publication, but in the last bit of the discourse. Of course, the kind of threats that we're most exposed to are the ones concerning libel and defamation, and of course, but those are the hardest one to understand if they are problematic or not at the beginning. What I do expect to see at the beginning is that the reporter has at least some basic knowledge of legal procedures and criminal procedures in particular, like knowing the difference between someone being accused or indicted or condemned, and knowing very often when you get pitches for investigations, the story might be already in a judicial case, or there might be a judicial case around the story, even if not directly connected to the part that we're talking about. And in that case, I expect the reporters to know at what stage the trial is, and because that changes a lot what you can write, what you cannot write, but even more importantly, what kind of documents you can obtain or cannot obtain, which parts of the investigation are still covered by secret or not covered by secret. So, understanding all of this, which is not very complicated, is still crucial to do a good work. Then, of course, I expect reporters to understand the basic principles of innocent until proven guilty, or the fact that the burden of proof will be on them for the whole investigation. So that they will need to build up an amount of evidence sufficient to at least allege that some kind of wrongdoing is being committed, and that this evidence will need to be tested by our process of fact-checking. So, of course, testimonies, we'll get into the difference between working with sources and documents later, but there will have to be a variety of sources to prove any point that we need to mean. And then, of course, this is banal again, but I'm going to mention it anyway, knowing the difference, especially when working with sources, between what's on the record, what's on background, what's off the record. Although I must say that this part is I seldom had problems with reporters understanding this. This is normally part of the background of everybody, and of course, if you can see that these concepts are understood directly in the pitch, that kind of is a very good point for me to give a green light to the story, to spend more time understanding it. If those things, if I see that the reporter is very vague on these things, then I think twice before taking on board the story, because of course it's always a lot of work from the editor's side when he decides to take on the story of freelancers. I would say that's it for the moment. I'll pass the ball to someone else.
Well, thank you, Giulio. When we spoke earlier, a couple of days ago, Wubi mentioned public interest and the importance of understanding and knowing public interest. And I also think, if you want, I think it isn't a problem if you want to reiterate some of the things that Giulio said and maybe put them into your words, what you think is important, because we're speaking about some aspects that are quite complex. So why don't you have a go, Wubi, and tell us why you mentioned public interest, and also feel free to get back to some of the things Giulio mentioned.
It's okay. Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be invited. Thank you very much. I can tell you something about the context with freelancers I had. It's very important that you come in an early stage of your investigation to the editor in the Netherlands, and you know all the differences between civic law and also criminal law, and you know that what the public interest is of your story. You have to it's always about somebody who is doing something wrong, but we as a society also they have also make some problems for the society. So it's not enough to only have proof about one wrongdoing. It has to have public relevance, and that's very important to know and to have arguments for that. I had also did some work with freelancers who came with a very good story about building a tunnel, and some accidents with migrants in the tunnel while they were building it, and they had to prove and films, etc. But it went wrong because, or it finally nearly went wrong because the confrontational phase they did themselves. And that's also, I would like to advise you, all of you, to do that confrontational phase together with the editor, the senior editor, and to talk about the strategy. Because when they came to me, they told me that they had some contacts with the lawyers, and they also got a letter of summons to appear in court, and that's too late. So what we did is we postponed the investigation and the publication, and then we found out that the confrontational phase wasn't done exactly step by step. So I would do all the difficult investigations together with an editor-in-law, senior editor. And also, when you do those difficult and risky investigations, do it together, because you can't, you won't come into a tunnel and see not everything. And when you do it together, you also have more sources, more impact. And when you publish in English, for example, it's also take care of doing that, because the English and Welsh law is completely different from that in, for example, Amsterdam and Holland. So it would be, I would suggest to do the publications together with other media in other countries, and then you have more substance and also power to get into all those lawyer things.
So we mentioned.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruby. We mentioned when we prepared that it might be useful to have a list of top tips, and I can see some of the top tips already coming through in what you're saying, the importance of collaboration, not just in terms of the different skills that people bring, but also in understanding different jurisdictions, because
Yes.
Of course varies, and there it is really useful to have people. And I know, Giulio, this is also relevant of your example that we'll hear later on, where you had that kind of collaboration. And then you said that you can draw on editors. And I think it is useful in the context of this webinar to sometimes state the obvious, but obviously confrontation being the point which you very carefully decide at which you go to the party that you're accusing of something. You're putting the case to them and you're offering a potential right to reply. And that strategic, as you said, is super important. So think that through with your team and your editors. That's what editors are there for.
Yeah, that's true. And also about the English law, they don't only look at the truth, if a fact is true or nothing, but also to the meaning of the story, and that's a difficult thing. It's completely different from what in Holland is used to.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ruby. Andrew, what's your take? And do you already have at this stage some top tips that you can go into?
Yeah. First off, great to see everybody. Good afternoon. For I imagine most of the people here, it's afternoon your time. So it's great to see everybody and wonderful to be on this panel. So very quickly, just to make sure, because I know we have a lot of attendees, I'm sure as freelancers, you're all familiar with the basics, but just to make sure, if I'm looking at a pitch, I want to know what the story is. I want to know why you think you're the person to do the story and why you think it's a good fit for our publication. So just a few paragraphs on that. And when I say what's the story about, try to envision what the nut graph might be, what, or if a newscaster were reading it on the evening news, or if it was on a TikTok video, what might those sentences look like? So just give me a sense of the story. But with an investigative pitch, of course, there are additional things like, is your story unique or you're breaking new ground? If I quickly check and I see the story's been done by 5 other people, my interest is going to diminish. But also, I would wonder why you pitched to me as an investigative editor a story that's already been done by others. Now, you could answer that by saying, oh, the story's been done partly by others, but here's the new ground I'm breaking. Hey, that's good too. But just be really clear that you could say, hey, listen, The Guardian did this, but here's how we're going to break new ground that's not been covered. Like has been mentioned by other panelists, what's the harm? What's the wrongdoing? What's the foul? Is it a violation of law? Are there people who are hurt? Tell me, as Wobby was saying, what's the public interest? I will want to know how well you can document the story. And that's been brought up too. But that means like, can you actually provide the documents? Can you give me the court records? Can you give me the data? You know, if you were following ships around the world, shipping materials, can you give me the bills of lading? Can you give me the data showing how it was going in from one country to another? And that may also have to do with your expertise. One thing that's difficult, I think, for freelancers or many early career journalists is to understand the difference between what's aspirational versus what you really have. So you might say, oh, this company's really doing this thing that's really wrong. And you may very well be right about that. My question to you will be, well, how well do you know that? How well can you document this? Whatever it is that you think you have. As I'm reading your pitch, of course, I'm looking at the time and resources and cost, and that also includes the legal considerations. You know, how soon will I need to bring in a lawyer? How soon might we be having discussions about the cost of legal considerations? And again, that doesn't mean we're not going to do a story. I just need to figure out what those things are because you might have to budget for it, right? That's what's happening on my end. Some reporters need more editing than others. That's fine, but you know, we have to deal with that. We'll also want to know how well a journalist is willing to work with others, because very often, as I'm sure you all have seen, journalists investigations are complicated. We might want to bring in specialists, perhaps some we have in-house, but also, you know, someone who's, whether you're bringing up collaborations, we all want to collaborate. It helps get stories out there, gets them to a wider audience. But that also means I need to know how well I think you may collaborate with people and what I need to know about you. I mean, if you come from, say, an advocacy background, hey, that's fine. But I also need to know, like, were you ever sued about something? And if you were, just tell me at the outset and we can walk through it. You know, I just need to know those kinds of things so I'm not being surprised, right? You don't want an editor to suddenly be surprised about that. And then, just so you know, on our end, editors, we're all very busy. We're juggling a lot of things, particularly if a story's near publication. So that means I do read the emails. I'm not sure how well I can very quickly give you a response. Someone sends me an email saying, "Are you interested in this story? I need to send an grant application in tomorrow." That really puts me in a hard spot. I may be interested in that story, but I have a lot of considerations that I need to go through. So because I'm balancing other things. Yours is not, I'm not sitting at my desk waiting for your pitch, you know. So I want to see your pitch, I want to read it, but you know, we're all balancing other things. So know that that's going on too, including conversations with lawyers. You know, I have a story that's about to go through in-depth legal review. I got to tell you, I'm getting a little tunnel visioned in my workflow. I'm not going to be answering a lot of emails while we're going through an intensive legal review. Right. So that just gives you some of the things that we're going through. I think some of the other the legal considerations then, I think we've been touching on, it varies country to country. Mongabay works with reporters who are all over the world, which means there are also security considerations as well as legal considerations. Will journalists get thrown out of the country? Will someone get arrested? What steps do we have in place for handling all of that? And I think we'll talk probably later about rights of reply and fairness, but reaching out to subjects of stories, doing it, I believe largely you want to do it earlier, you know, but how thorough and how well prepared we are for that is a big consideration. But I'll stop here because I think we're going to go into that discussion too. But I wanted to give you some of the things that I'm looking for as a pitch comes in and what I'm thinking about, particularly when it comes to legal and security issues.
Thank you. That's all really useful. I'm wondering whether we should go into, do all of you bring in outside lawyers? Do all of you have access to outside lawyers? And is that what you would do before a story would published? Or how do you assess whether outside legal help is needed and what you as editors take on yourselves?
Shall I go?
Yeah, you've mentioned this before.
let's say that after you have had enough experience and you've been sued the right amount of times, which I guess happens to all of us, you kind of develop an instinct for that. But generally speaking, it's during the confrontation stage when you send the right of replies that you tend to understand in a more serious way if there are real legal threats and concerns or not, especially in terms of defamation and things like that. Companies that sometimes do not respond at all might be less worrying than companies that send very complicated responses already saying that they will sue on this, on that other point. They say it explicitly, but this is not a rule because sometimes you get sued by people that never responded to questions anyway. So you can't really count on that. Let's just say that when I feel that the story is simple enough, that the thing is straightforward, when it doesn't go into when any case doesn't look like it can go into civil law, which is much more complicated than criminal law, I might decide that as an editor I can just run it without bringing in an extra lawyer to look at the story from the outside. But whenever this is not the case, so big companies that already threaten to sue, or you see that you can be threatened by civil law, which is, again, I say it again, as we were saying before, the point is no longer just if what you're writing is true or not, but is what kind of damage you might be causing to a third party in economical terms. And this, it's very complicated. Now, in these cases, we always bring in a lawyer to look at the story. Actually, we have two different degrees. Like we have a younger lawyer that reads all the stories that we send him very quickly and just pulls up red flags if there are parts that, in his opinion, are worrisome. And this is a check that we do most of the times with most of the stories, and it's quick enough. Like this guy works for us. It's not internal. It's not hired by Irpi Media, but he constantly works with us. And stories that are more complicated would bring in a more senior, experienced lawyer. It's always the same again, and it's the same lawyer that defends us in case of legal cases and when we get sued, both in civil and in criminal law. And of course, in that case, I need probably an extra week of work to have him look at the story and come back with complicated and detailed remarks that we need to work through. So, it never happened so far that I have to kill a story because of what the lawyer says, but it did happen that we have to substantially rework it. So it's an amount of time that you have to consider when you work in these cases. So let's say I would bring in an extra lawyer, I would say roughly 30% of the times, right? And have 80% of the story, I get them read by the other lawyer, by the younger lawyer, let's say.
And crucially, that protects your publication as well as the freelancer. So that's important to say. I want to make 2 points quickly, or ask 2 things quickly before we then dive into the stories. So I'd like to cover rights of reply, fairness, and the confrontation in the stories, because I know they certainly Giulio and Wubi's stories touch on that. But quickly, and maybe this I throw back to Andy, because you spoke about this in the conversation that we had. What kind of documentation would you, or you spoke quite visually to me how you expected a story to be documented with footnotes, and what gives you confidence in the layout and thoroughness of documentation of the investigative process that it makes freelancers or a journalist, any journalist approach sound? So quite specifically to this question.
Right. Oh, and if I could just quickly respond to the previous comments, just super quick before I get to that, is civil law. So laws vary country to country. And just to give you all freelancers attending this webinar about how broadly that could be, here in the United States, it is possible to libel meat. And you could be sued for libeling meat. Not a person, but meat in general. You could be sued for that. So there are quirks in laws that could be very regional or state or provincial that you need to know about. And as an editor, you're trying to be aware of it, but these things are very real. And also the idea of when you're sued in court and the monetary damages that you cause, someone's going to have to prove that you caused financial damages. And that's a real issue as well. So just to be aware of that. But if I could very quickly give you all an example of how a pitch evolves and how it becomes documented, maybe that could help answer your question, Juliana. So let me just quickly go to share this. 1 second. Thank you for your patience. Here we go. Okay, great. So we're talking about SLAP and other considerations. So I do teach on the side, so I want to tell you just how loose I can be in the pitching process, particularly for my students. This is a pitch I got from a student about a year and a half ago. It is about as vague and general and unfocused as any pitch could possibly be. And yet I saw a kernel of what could be a really good story. And it had to do with oysters. Who thinks about oysters? I don't really give oysters a lot of thought, but she pitched it as a freelancer. This story about oysters.
Can you go into slide function because it's really small to read?
Sure, absolutely. Forgive me.
So
Thank you for saying that.
Also tell us, maybe just like, since you said, can you summarize a pitch in 3 sentences?
Yeah. So this pitch is very vague and general about raw oyster consumption and essentially that there were illnesses with oysters. That's the general pitch, however vague and broad it is. I asked her to go back and give me more. And she said, well, it appears that there are a lot of foodborne illnesses having to do with raw oysters. Okay, now I'm interested because this begins to answer the harm question. There are people getting sick. What are they getting sick from? Raw oysters. But it's still very vague. And later on, what we realize is that here in the United States, most of our oysters come from overseas, from other countries. In fact, several European nations are some of the world's largest exporters of oysters. Well, imagine what could happen to an oyster going from Spain to the United States. There's a lot of ways that pathogens can get into oysters. So now we have harm. We know that most of the oysters travel great distances and that there's this industry that's getting people sick. So this became the resulting story. We published it in a series of newspapers. It evolved into a collaboration. It reached about 1 million readers. The Vancouver Sun, the National Post. We focused particularly on Canadian oysters. We were able to isolate the illnesses to a particular spot in Vancouver that was causing more than 1,000 of Americans to be hospitalized, to get sick, to even face possible death. So there were real issues, real harm, and we could name names and go to locations and talk about specific people. We published this as well at Inside Climate News. Now I want to show you the draft. So this is the draft as it began to evolve. So you've seen it go from a very vague pitch over the course of months to a specific pitch. So this is it in draft form in our shared Google Doc. But look closely here. We have everything footnoted. We have transcripts of every interview. We know exactly what page to go to in any transcript to know where a quote came from. We also have spreadsheets so we can check the data. We have reports from particular provinces, in this case in Canada, or state reports, just to make sure that you could see this, to highlight it. Here you could see the actual footnotes that appear throughout the entire copy, footnotes to each and every section. You can see how detailed this goes. This is a deeper look into some of the footnotes that we have. We have licenses. We have shipping records. We have statements that we got from companies responding to what we're saying. We have comments from health officials and health documents. To give you an idea, this is a story that we're close to publishing at Mongabay. We have a variation on the system. We do have this detailed footnote system, but we also color code passages for how certain we are of what's been written in each and every clause. So you'll notice here in red, this is an earlier version, in red, we have a section that we cannot verify quickly. So we're going to be going back to the reporter to say, how do you know it's been in the last 25 years? Little things like that that may seem so inconsequential, we'll be coming back to you on. This is coming back at you. And this is going through a fact checker who's also diligently reviewing it, as am I. And this turned out to be a collaboration with reporters in different countries, including in Europe. So each and everything is going to be color coded for how certain we are for what we have. And as you can see, as we go through the process, we basically want everything to be green. Green means we're really, really confident in all of this. And then, of course, as it continues to go through production, we'll be stripping away all the footnotes and color coding. But that's to give you a sense of just how detailed and anal we will be about everything you see in that story.
That's amazing to see. So thank you very much. I'm wondering, Giulio, or would we exactly, would you like to comment on that and maybe say how you work and whether that's similar?
Yes, we work for the same as Andrew with footnotes. And we also expect freelance colleagues to have a timeline of all their contacts they had from the beginning till the end with everybody. And that includes also anonymous sources. And about those sources, I want to tell you that it's also very important that you know what kind of classified information you have. If, for example, when you have state secrets, that's a criminal offense. So you can't have that. And we have to talk about that when you know something. It's also very difficult. Sorry?
What would be an example of that that we all know?
It's always about safety and security. Intelligence information sometimes can be state secret. Also, some fuel shell. We had earthquakes here because of the Shell and ExxonMobil gas thing in the northern part, and there was also some state secrets in it, and that's difficult to because when you have it, it's a criminal offense. So you have to think about it and to talk, and so you can't have it. Well, that's important, and for sometimes it feels for colleagues, also my own colleagues who are part of the editing team, difficult to tell something about their sources, anonymous sources, but we have to know that what you that it's okay and it's right, and you have to know what the code is, the journalistic code of the paper you want to publish in, or the outlet you want to do.
Thanks.
Yeah, I can just say that we work very similarly to what Andy showed. I also need detailed footnotes on the draft, and we fact check from those notes. Maybe the only thing that wasn't said is that, of course, I will need to see the original copy of the documents, especially if it's court records. Like, I want it with the stamp of the tribunal on top. They cannot be just a random Word document. So Andy was making the example of spreadsheets to check data, but on those spreadsheets, I would like to see the link to the original photo, at least, of the bill of lading that entry of the spreadsheet refers to. Of course, it depends on it's a case by case thing, but always we need to have at least one copy of the originals visible.
Thanks, Giulio. That sounds great. And before this really is the last question before we go into the examples, I just want to say that all of this can sound incredibly daunting to somebody who is starting, who is not an established journalist. And I also want to cover this because the investigations that we go into are really quite big and meaty. So bearing in mind that time is finite, before we go into the examples, freelancers who are maybe more at the beginning of their career, what would you say to them in terms of you all taking pitches? Just give us a headline. Do they stand a chance pitching to you? Andrew's already in some ways answered that, Giulio, and Ruby, what about you? And how do you support people? Because it's also about bringing up the next generation. We all started out at some stage.
Oh yeah, well, let's say that I try to find the time, and of course that means that I can take less stories at the same time. But there is a team of editors at Irpi Media, so we share the work. But of course, with younger journalists, you find the time to explain them these basic concepts, and you do it with their pitch in front. And so you point out at the weak points of the pitch, and you say, what about this? How you plan to prove this? What are we going to do about this other? And all of that. The biggest problem that I sometimes find with younger journalists is that they sometimes have a vague understanding of the difference between activism and journalism. So, they very often side with the committee of citizens that are angry about whatever big project, and especially common this in environmental and climate investigations, because there is a lot of people that come from an activist background and that come into journalism because of that. And that's exactly the kind of stories. I mean, it happens much more rarely in organized crime stories that I have to re-explain the difference between activism and journalism to a young journalist. In climate, it happens very often. And then, of course, I recommend them to look at the issue from the point of view of the company and to try and understand what they're doing and why, and their priorities and all of that, because it's a clearer way to find out what kind of wrongdoing we can actually talk about and what other aspects are more suited to different kinds of action. Like, not necessarily, they're very important issues. They're not necessarily journalism or not necessarily investigative journalism very often. Like, you can do an opinion piece on how it's not a good idea to have that kind of power plant close to that kind of neighborhood, for instance, but it's not necessarily an investigation. And this is, again, something that I find quite often some confusion about. So, clear up this, and then if you have the time, you go through the story, through all the details of the pitches with the younger reporters. And I find out that, once you clear the initial bits, that the process goes smoother. You have to be prepared to take a lot of time when you're not an expert on your investigation. You have to fill that experience gap with working time normally. But if they're up for it, the results can be very good.
Right. So, Ruby, I'm going to jump to your investigation and introduce it a little bit, the one that we've discussed and before. And it is a story about tank cleaning. And just to explain what tank cleaning actually is, it's a story that is set on a highway that connects the Rhine area in Germany that has a lot of chemical industry with Rotterdam. And on it are trucks with tanks on them that are transporting benzene. So that's a potentially cancer-causing chemical, and these tanks need to be washed. And there is a company that is responsible for washing and cleaning these tanks, and they did so with water and not in the prescribed ways. And what you investigated is the impact of this on the workers. Also, there was some of the water that was used for the chemical tank cleaning that ended up in the river Meuse. So there was an environmental aspect to the story. There was a human health aspect to the story. It was also complicated because some of the workers were migrant workers. So you had to deal with that aspect of the story. And from what I understand, this was actually a problem that was known to the authorities. So it should not have come as a surprise to the authorities, but they had failed to intervene. and there'd been workplace problems because of that. So that's sort of the backdrop. So tank cleaning, because it took me a moment to get my head around it, what it actually is. But we're thinking about tanks that are transporting benzene, and you dived into this story, and actually it became quite hairy because the company was prepared to go quite far in
Yes. Yes, they did. But first, it was a very good documented story, investigation. Everything was there. There were films. There was proof in all kinds of things. Also chats, audio tapes, everything. So we had lots of proof. So my colleague was thinking, well, it's not that difficult, so I will do it on my own. Well, that was my fault number one, my fault, because she said, well, I will go to the firm to ask what their side, what they say about this, and what they think about these facts. And she tried to have contact, but they didn't answer at all. So then we wrote down a lot of questions, and we gave the firm, I think, a week or two to react and to answer the questions, and they still didn't do anything, not at all. So we called and we asked, well, we sent you some questions. Can you please answer them? Or say, well, I don't want to answer them. Well, this director of the firm, a small firm, he was saying, I don't want to talk with you, and you can't publish, and it's not true. And please, I won't inform you at all. So what are you doing then? You have all the proof. You have a very, social relevant story, investigation. So we talked with our lawyer, and we decided to publish. But the director didn't want to react at all. And it happened. It was published. The politicians were very. They were very. How do you say that? They didn't like it, and they also in Parliament there was a big. There were some questions about it, and after a couple of months, there was a lawyer at our door, and he asked, "Well, can we talk with the editor, with the colleague, the investigative reporter, because I want to know some sources." And he was doing some fishing expedition. How we got that information? Who was the how do you call it? Who gave all the information, and we didn't say anything, and our lawyer was involved, and she said, finally she said, well, if you don't want to do anything on it, go to court. They went to court. They said everything isn't okay, and it took I think 2 years before we went. There was a hearing. There was one colleague who made it story. It was personal, very, very tough for her to do that on her own, and I really was ashamed that I let her do that on her own. And finally, the court said, well, none of the allegations of the firm is sustained. So NFC was in all kind of. It was a completely correct story. But now they are they did appeal, you call it appeal, and now we're still doing that job. The problem is when you come in such a long course, my colleague was, I think, 3 months working on all the questions for the court. So she couldn't do anything on journalistic investigations. And now we are during an appeal. You have to do take again 3 months of answering questions, and it's about the scientific things. So you have to know everything, every comma. But we think we will win again. But it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of money and energy and a lot of stress. So I hope I should advise everybody from you to do such investigations together with another colleague, and before before the publication, you don't know when they become so harsh, because we did also a lot of stories on Schiphol airport, but that's a big firm, and they can lose their reputation, and they don't do those court things. But a small firm, they have to lose nothing, so they go to court, and that's completely, you can't see it coming always. That's good to know.
So my questions, in fact, 2 questions for you then is, one, again, in the pre-conversation, you mentioned source protection.
Yeah, source protection, yeah.
Sorry, if you can say a little bit more about that. And then the second question is about, if this person was a freelancer, and as you said, they can't work, they're fully now on dealing with this story from a legal point of view, would you pay them? How does it work? Is there loss of income? That is a huge risk for freelancers, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. The first question about source protection. We spoke with a lot of workers, migrant workers in the tank cleaning business, and they were from Poland and or from Hungary, etc. And we had all their the information they told us. We interviewed them with a notary. And then we took notes of everything they said. And then we put it in the file for the lawyers to decide on that. Because they were anonymous in the, but they had proof. And that was a way to work with all those sources. When a freelance person will pitch this story with us, I would say you have to do it with somebody from our colleagues, with an editor from our, or a reporter from our bureau, and I would say have some contact with the Association of Journalists, because a lot of freelancers also have contact with NVA, that's the association, and they can give you some legal advice before publication. That's the publication itself we are responsible for, so we will help you doing it, and we will pay that. But when you will be personally responsible for it, that it's a different case. And then you have the Association of Journalists who can help you. And we have also some funds who can help people. But I don't want to make all of you afraid from these stuffs. You have to dig those stories. They are very important. And lawyers are always, in every stage of your investigation, there will be a lawyer. And that's not something to be afraid of. It's also, but it's very important to have contact with them, to stay in conversation, and keep the editor involved also, I would say.
Thank you, Ruby. Giulio, I'll go to you with the second case study before coming back to Andy. The story that you want to talk about is a very large investigation, in fact, between three different groups that Irpi Media was part of, OCCRP and Amado Info in Venezuela. And it was an investigation about the smuggling of gold out of Venezuela via Curacao. And story is about, I think, anyway, you'll say about 15 years ago or so, you'll give me the time. But we're talking about large amount of gold, 70 tons, I think a couple of billion US dollars worth, huge. And your story alleged that this gold...
90 tons in total.
90 tons, okay, thank you. So what you investigated is how this gold ended up in Switzerland and Italy, and you oversaw the Italian part as editor, and how this gold ended up in the supply chain of Apple, Tesla, and Nvidia. So really serious companies, the names of whom we all know, and that the gold was labeled scrap to be recycled, but you said it wasn't. And there was another angle apart from the smuggling, is that at the time, I mean, this is more recent, the changes in Venezuela, and probably the gold trade hasn't changed, but there are huge human rights abuses in the gold mines, so there are environmental and human rights concerns, which was the backdrop of your investigation. So
yeah, all the pieces came together from different parts. So the story came to Irpi Media first, proposed by freelancers, but freelancers that we knew and trusted a lot. From some of them are also quite famous and experts about the topic. One of the guys of the initial team is Joseph Polisiuk, the Venezuelan journalist of Armando Info. He has documented the destruction of the Venezuelan Amazon forest, especially because of minery, for a long time. So let's just say that I was confident enough that we could prove everything on the environmental side, on the amount of damage that is being done to the forest there, and the presence of illegal actors in that area. Although, again, illegal in the Venezuelan situation is a complicated word, because illegal from what point of view? From the Venezuelan point of view, basically with the creation of the Orinoco mining arch, Maduro has given a sort of a free rein to many actors that work there. But still, his intent was to bringing money to the Venezuelan coffers, and the NGOs that are working on the area estimated actually between 80 and 90% of the gold that came out of Venezuela came out illegally. So to the further damage of Venezuela itself, that didn't make any money out of it. This is part of the gold that we investigated. We didn't focus on how illegal it was for it to get out of Venezuela. That was not the point of our investigation. The point of this investigation is that this gold came into Europe as scrap gold from Curacao. Now, Curacao, as most of you know, is a very small island nation, 70 kilometers north of the Venezuelan coast. It's a very short plane ride, and it's probably a very beautiful island. I've never been, but it's got no mines. It's got a very small jewelry market. And of course, it has been in the years in 2018, between 2018 and 2019, the London Bullion Market Association, which is the association that regulates the gold market in London, which is the biggest one in the world, and by extension, their ruling tends to be accepted as a standard anywhere in the world, decided not to accept any more gold coming in from Curacao. So, this market has stopped, but as you were saying, this is not this is an old story, but not that old, because we have the first operations of export of gold through the same group of companies that we investigated started, if I'm not mistaken, around 2012, 2013, but the last one was in 2019. So they continued until relatively recently. And we managed, beside the pitch that was quite promising already, the initial data was very rich in this case, and very indirect, because it all comes from, let's say, a leak a tip-off that we had. A source that gave us the information had all the internal documents of a divorce trial, where the head of the company that made the export from Curacao to Europe was divorcing his wife. His wife was convinced that he was hiding a lot of money from her. And thanks to US laws that are very effective in those cases, the wife managed to demand a lot of documents, including the bills of lading of all the shipments of gold that his husband's company had done to Europe, because the wife was convinced that the European companies, the refineries, were like holding money that belonged to his husband, were like creditors to his husband, and she was probably entitled to a part of those credits. So she managed to get all the shipments of gold that they sent to Europe, both to Italy and to Switzerland, and also to Turkey. But we didn't focus on the Turkish part because part of the gold also went to Turkey. So there were a lot of very important information in this trial, including statements from the suppliers of gold to the company that exported it that clearly stated that they took the gold from mines. So we knew that gold freshly mined from Venezuela in this situation was probably illegal, was surely unethical and problematic, and was also, according to current laws, not acceptable in Europe. Also at the time, the gold coming from mines needs to pass a huge level of scrutiny. And this is basically why they chose to label it as scrap. Now, it's very easy to label gold as scrap. There have been instances where just outside the artisanal mine, the gold gets molded into rough bracelets or stuff like that, just to say that it's no longer mine gold, it's already scrap gold. As soon as you like mold it into chains, you can already melt it and say that it was scrap gold. This saves companies from the level of scrutiny that is expected and demanded for mined gold. If you are importing, buying, moving gold that has been freshly mined, theoretically you should do not only due diligence, but you should do inspections on site. You should go to the mine. You should do a very high level of controls. While scrap gold is recognized that it's impossible to follow the chain before the pawn shop, let's say, that collected it. So it has a much lower bar of evidence that you need to pass through. So where did the problems start in this story? They started with the first confrontation, and this is why I believe that we need, as journalists in general, to do confrontations with our bad guys much sooner than we normally do. Like, we need to plan them and do them at least months in advance, because what happened in this case is that the Swiss refinery and also the Italian one, they simply denied all of our evidence. They denied the statements of the suppliers of the gold that said that they took it from mines. They said it's not true. They denied all of our claims, and they said our own X-ray testing of the gold proves that it's scrap gold and it's not mined gold. Now, in this case, we were lucky because we had the same test results, because they were included in the documents that the refinery used to to settle the amount of money that they need to give, right? Like all the consignment, they check the percentage of gold, the percentage of silver, the percentage of other metals, because then they will pay according to these results the supplier. So as the supplier had to give these documents to court because of his divorce, we had these documents as well. So what we could do is show these documents to a bunch of much accredited other experts, including university professors and different sources. But we ended up having 6 different people looking at the same lab tests that the company never shared with us, by the way. They said our lab tests show that it's not mined gold, but it's just scrap. But we asked them, can you show us this test? They said no. But so if we didn't have them on our own, we would have been in a much worse position. Now, having them, we could show them to independent experts that all confirmed that no way, that is absolutely surely mined gold. It always had the same percentage of gold to silver. It didn't have any other materials inside, while scrap gold coming from jewelry very often has a much lower purity because most gold in the world is 18 carats, which corresponds to 75% gold. And samples of gold that we had tested were all above 80%. Most of them were above 90%, so very pure. And also that the relation between gold and silver was always constant, and gold and other elements was always constant. We're very like it came always from the same source. While if you have scrap gold, it by definition doesn't always come from the same source. So we, in the end, were satisfied that our evidence was strong enough to publish. But to be honest, we're just waiting for the letter from the lawyer because it's very likely that the company will want to contest these findings anyway. The story's been published, what was it, a week ago? So they still have a long time to to sue us. But yeah, this is one of those cases where we are ready for a long court fight, as Whoopi was saying, and we'll put our lawyers in protection of the reporters for as long as it takes. But then, of course, what complicates this story in particular, and why we're thankful that we are doing this as a collaboration with other international outlets, is because this story is across different jurisdictions. Now, the fact publishing in Italian, like publishing in Dutch or publishing in German, is always a sort of a small protection because it's harder for them to sue you in jurisdictions that are famously difficult for journalists to fight in, such as the UK. OCCRP will publish in English, and that means that our reporters will be able to be sued also in England, most likely, or in Switzerland, wherever the story is available. So in that case, yes, the fight is going to be long and hard. We already have some cases of this kind ongoing. One of our reporters has been sued for another story in France, United States, Italy, and another one. I don't remember which other jurisdiction she was sued in, but this is how big.
Do you have, and because I do want to leave some time for Andy.
Yeah, sure.
Do you have 3 bullet point learnings for anyone in this? 3 things that you've taken away or have been indeed reconfirmed, something maybe that, sometimes something already, and then you go, like, this story really proves to me that this is...
I'm not very good at summarizing in 3 points, but I would say do the confrontation early, be ready to do another one and a third one and a fourth one, like be ready to have a long conversation with these people, because and those things normally make the story better, but they can also risk of breaking it. So take all the time. Don't do the confrontation as a boring duty that you have to do last minute before going to publication. It's fully part of the research. You have to integrate it. You have to do it early. You have to be ready to go there again with more questions and get more answers and have to study their answers, because sometimes the answers are very complicated. So I would say this is very important, and this is something that very often reporters leave too late in their process of work. Like they expect that a week is enough. Very rarely a week is enough. Very rarely. So this is the main thing that in this case took a very long time. And then I would say, like, study very much the evidence that you have. We hadn't realized at the beginning that test results would have been crucial for us to allow us for publication. We thought that the declarations, that all the other evidence, the bills of lading, the supply chain documents were enough, and we didn't expect the company to just deny and say, no, it's not true, because our evidence looked overwhelming. But in the end, unless we had and we didn't realize at first how precious was the evidence that we already have. So, hope that you have enough that you can, answer to every question. This is not a great tip, I understand. I'll stop here for the moment.
Great, but these are 2 really important things. You don't know, keep hold of your evidence, because you don't know what comes in, when, and why. So you didn't expect that. It was really useful to have the test results. And the second one, and I really appreciate that, and I think maybe with a filmmaking background, we think of this confrontation much more than print journalists, because of course we can turn it into a really sort of big moment in a film if we manage to get that on camera. So we probably think about it before print journalists do, but because there's drama in it. it, but I think there's some creativity in it too, legally and in terms of writing. So think about the confrontation early. Andy, when you were hearing all of that, I know, and I'm really grateful that your case study actually came from a student. I really appreciate that, because I think it also takes some of the high stakes in terms of pitching out of this conversation. All of the investigations were high stakes. And what's important for you to add before we, at the moment, they're actually, and I'm not seeing questions. I'm seeing you in this. Do you have questions that I'm not seeing?
No, I don't think we've had any questions so far.
Okay, we still have people in this webinar, so that's great. And thank you for staying on. Then Andy, over to you. And we trust people to go into questions as and when, but it sounds like you're already speaking to a lot what's of value.
Right. Now, I selected showing a student story just to let everybody know that really we're open to pitches. To underscore a few things, I think Giulio was mentioning the idea of people may come from an activist background. That, that's perfectly fine. And I mention that because freelancers may be coming from multiple backgrounds, but really the willingness to work as a journalist is what we'll be looking for. Some things that will be very difficult, though, is if, for instance, the documents that you have were somehow stolen, that's going to be a question. If you stole them, that's going to be almost a hard stop. So there's a difference in US law, for instance, where documents come from. So I worked at the New York Times on the Snowden files and the WikiLeaks trove of documents. In those cases, those documents were obtained by other people, so the risk for journalists is less. However, we could have been prosecuted under national security law, which is a wholly different set of laws. But just to let you know, how you got the documents can matter. And we will ask about those things. I also did work in television, including at NBC News, which is one of our big broadcasters here in the United States. But to go to the point that several of you raised, it is so, so important to reach out to the other side early. And let me give an example of how that can be a game changer. So we're working on a story about Amazon, the retail supplier. I've done stories as well about the rainforest, but that's different. The retail company and labor abuses within Amazon, particularly in the Middle East. Okay, so first, as we're working with a freelancer, we had questions. We had on the number of cases. We had about a dozen or so cases. Almost all were anonymous. So I had to work a lot with the freelancer and other reporters to say, we need to get more cases and we need to get people on the record. Now, people were not welcoming that because that meant a lot of work, months and months of work. But we did it. We got more than 50 people, including more than a dozen, to go on the record. I went to Amazon 3 months before air and publication. And I can tell you that some people were surprised. Why would you go to Amazon so early? Well, this was a story both for print, including The Guardian and other European publications, as well as for broadcast. I was thinking about the broadcast cycle, which means you got to do a lot of logistical planning, how you're going to get camera crews to places like Nepal in the Middle East. But also, I want to make sure we got it right and that we engaged with Amazon and hear what they had to say. I was literally on the phone with Amazon almost every workday for those 3 months going into publication. Amazon heard all the detailed information we had. We spoke every day. The result is that Amazon admitted wrongdoing. Amazon then has compensated more than 700 workers about $2 million. An editor came to me later and said, Amazon never admits wrongdoing. And I said, well, we went to them early and we had everything nailed down to the nth degree, and we had a lot. And I think those are the things that really matter. If we did the normal, we'll give them a writer reply letter with 5 days before publication, none of that would have happened. I'm almost certain of that. So let me tell you that seeking to engage companies early really, really matters. And the quality of your story matters. And I emphasize this a lot because I see a lot with younger journalists who are afraid or to engage with the other side. I think it's a common problem that I see with younger reporters and students. Either they're scared, whatever it is, I don't quite know the reason. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that we need to engage early, and I see a great reluctance to do it. Or there's such an assuredness that, oh, I've got the goods. What could they possibly say? I've got it all. And so they save it for the last minute. It's just not going to fly. So just wanted to emphasize those things.
Great. Okay, and that's also superb timing. We've got 15 minutes left. So there's been a couple of questions in the Q&A. I can't actually see the participants, which I think is by design and I'm not a great friend of Zoom. I'm a Google person. But hello, Mark Hunter in the call. Good to have you here. And then anonymous attendee is asking, and I don't know if the panel's got an answer to this. How do you suggest we can find lawyers in France or in Belgium, for example, as freelancers, I think? And so if you're not already attached to a media or you're not attached to a story, I believe this is how I read the question. So if I, as a freelancer, want to find a trustworthy lawyer, how do I go about this? Any tips?
If it's a lawyer to defend yourself from libel and stuff like this, there are some organization, the Media Defense Lawyer Initiative. There are some, I don't remember all the name, but there are several organizations that protect freelancers and then can provide some sort of legal covering also for free. If the question is, how do I find a trustworthy lawyer in general, then no, I don't have an answer. Honestly, first time I needed a lawyer, I went to my cousin who's a lawyer. But ideally you will need some lawyers that have specific experience with media law, and so you will want to look with someone that actually does work with media, that is attached to media. Then you can contact them separately if you want to. I don't know if this answers the questions or not.
You have also the Free Press Unlimited, who has good contacts with lawyers, and you can go there. And you have also national associations for journalists, and they also have sometimes good spokespeople. And
I think the trade union in the UK, the NUJ, might be able, the National Union of Journalists might be able to point you lawyers. And then, Media Defense Fund, Giulio, you mentioned. And then also, I've just gone blank on the organization that deals with slaps.
Reporter Shield?
Yes, Reporter Shield. So that's slap specific. But thank you, Andrew. It might be worthwhile reaching out to them to see if they have media lawyers in country. And then we've got another anonymous attendee, which with a question: could reaching out to the other side, and this goes back, Andy, to what you were talking about, could reaching out to the other side early sometimes be a risk, where a major company or government official knows what you're working on and they could prevent other sources from speaking to you?
Of course, right? But that's how you work on your timing. So you'll notice in the example that I gave, we did go to Amazon after we had everything lined up. So we were not asking vague, imprecise questions. We had done the lion's share of reporting. But yes, you sort out that timing. It's kind of hard to talk about it in a webinar because it can often be case specific. So, and there are certainly cases where you don't seek comment, until near the end. It's just as a general practice, I believe it's good to reach out to the other side early.
I would like to speak with the editor about those moments when you do that, and for your whole investigation. When are you finished with you have stuff enough to go to and you have also to speak about scenarios, because sometimes they deny everything, like Giulio told us. What will you do then? What are the possibilities? And the senior editors can help you with that. And don't be afraid to contact them. You have to do it together then, when you...
Okay. Hi, Nick. Nice to see you on the call as well. And I can see that Anna is typing an answer for you about does Journalism Fund provide legal aid? I'm wondering, I can see another question which is relevant about how do you make a transition into a newsroom, but I want to see if there's some more legal questions before that existential question, of course. Maybe we can get from all three of you, get an answer to. I mean, I'm also curious if in the absence of any other open questions about lawyers, Andy, I sort of appreciated when I looked at Mongabay how many different jurisdictions, well, jurisdictions was, I meant to say, how many different countries, and my notes are somewhere, I think it was 50 different countries. So you really potentially taking pictures from journalists who live in really dangerous, in places that are where journalists are far less protected than all of us are from the Northern Hemisphere. Do you have any thoughts on that specifically? And how does Mongabay deal with that, with the fact that really, people don't always have the same protection? And I know that's legal going into physical, but these things are obviously closely related.
Well, that's why earlier on when I was talking, I was trying to be very clear that, you go very quickly from legal issues to security and safety issues. And it's a lot to unpack. You could do an entire seminar just on legal safety and security issues, and that still wouldn't cover it all. So it's a real issue. So you make considerations. You undertake considerations. And obviously, what we're thinking most about is the security and safety of journalists. I mean, you do want to hit the pause button every time that becomes an issue, and you want to really talk about, are there other ways to do it? So, for instance, is there a way to do the same story but not have a journalist within that country work on it? Do you anonymize the names of the journalists who worked on the piece so that they are not exposed? Have we taken thorough safety precautions to protect our journalists, meaning, encrypted communications? Are there any ways that they could possibly be traced, to a particular story? So all these things are very, very real. So just to say it varies country to country, but there are, again, we want to do stories. So that means we very well could be saying like, what are the alternative ways that we could do the story that can still keep the reporter safe?
Right. Wubi, is there anything that you want to add before I go to the last story? I'm conscious we haven't heard from you for a while, but you don't have to. Right. So then there is another anonymous attendee, and I want to go into this because we're talking about environmental investigation specifically, and I don't know if anybody on the panel has an answer to that, but do you suggest not naming smaller companies involved in polluting rural areas, especially in cases where getting access to documents and thorough data is not possible, but the reporter still has enough evidence for the story? I don't know if do you feel we have enough information in this question for you to answer this?
Well, maybe vaguely. Can give a precise answer, but first of all, I would ask, how do you know it's actually polluting rural areas? How do you think you have enough evidence for the story if you can't get access to document and thorough data? It's particularly difficult. So one thing is, if out of a small company in a rural area there is a constant flow of greenish mud like the Simpson coming out of a tube inside the local river, I would take pictures of that and probably publish this picture stating that there is some mysterious unidentified fluids going in the river, but I wouldn't call it pollution. That's the thing, because I don't know if it's pollution or not. Then there is the possibility, and there are also some grants, specific grants for that, to get scientists on board and do some independent testing of that stuff. In that case, you will have your documents that say, yes, it's pollution, no, it's not pollution, and you can prove it. The thing is that you need to prove it to be able to say it is pollution. It's very hard to imagine a situation where you don't have access to data and yet you feel you have enough evidence for the story. Maybe you don't actually have enough evidence for the story, at least not of a story where you say that company is polluting. You might have a story where there is, mud spill, but you don't know if it's pollution or not. Again, it really depends on what evidence do you actually have and what you don't. But yeah, think of how you frame it. There is a way that you can try and make claims that are surely true and maybe are not the ones that you want to make, though, right? So I don't know if this is enough.
Great. Thank you for that answer. I know we haven't got the person who said, how do I make a transition into a newsroom? Yeah, it's a big question. Yeah, I can see the reaction.
Really want to. Some of the best journalists I know are freelancers, and they're happy to be freelancers. Like, it's a different job.
What I'm trying to do is stay on time. We've got 3 minutes left. So I want to start by thanking Giulio, Wubi, and Andy, who've been really amazing panelists. Really great variety, different perspectives, different countries, different backgrounds. Thank you so much for coming on board with this. We searched for a little while to find 3 excellent editors to join us in this, and I think it worked really well. So thank you for that. Thank you also, Journalism Fund, Anna, and the rest of the team for hosting this. I thought it was a really rock solid discussion, and we still have a fair amount of people in the room, given that this is both abstract and important. So thanks for joining us and staying with us, to everybody who's still there. And Anna, I'll give the last word to you.
Thank you very much, Juliana. Thank you very much to our esteemed speakers. I think this was super insightful and very practical, which is what was the aim of it. And I also want to thank everybody who attended and continues to do this difficult work of being an environmental journalist in today's world, despite, all the legal risks, including or poor pay sometimes, and all the context that we know surrounds us. I invite you to attend our next sessions that I expect to be as brilliant, because they will be also prepared by Juliana. So it will be the 12th of March and 9th of April. I put the links in the chat, but you can also find the details on Journalism Fund website. And apply for our grants. Of course, we do our best to support journalists with financial means, but also providing mentors who can guide them and help with specific skills and so on. Thank you, everyone.
Anna, there's a question about the recording that's just popped us whilst you were speaking. Where do we find the recording?
Yes, the recording will be made available most likely tomorrow, because I think we also perhaps want to send out this few short top tips from our speakers with it. So let us put that together. And as soon as that's done, I'll email everybody who registered with the link. But you can also check out, if you go to the Journalism Fund page and click on webinars, you will see past webinars all have recordings right there. So you can also do just that if you don't open your email or ignore my, anything coming from me. So
put it on LinkedIn, all of us probably.
Yes, we will put it on our social media. Do subscribe for our social media accounts or newsletters, whatever you prefer, because we also share important hints, new investigations, events that are happening, and so on. So many excellent opportunities for environmental journalists. Thank you, everybody, so much again for joining us. It's been wonderful, and see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.